And we're live on another exciting episode of Starfleet Boy, where we have a casual and informal conversation about Star Trek. And today we're talking about Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. Hi, Doctor.
That's from your Berkeley days, right?
Yes, when I was doing LDS.
A little too much LDS.
Do you like the gag?
That's good, sir.
I saved that one for you. I made a different entrance than usual.
You have a singular wit, Doctor.
So in honor of Star Trek IV, I'm wearing this to cover my Vulcan ears. Because as they say,
so excited about this.
I was so excited. As they say in the movie, we are about to encounter a primitive and paranoid culture. So I think let's get straight to it. Do we need a summary?
I don't need a summary. I know.
I know. We know, but just for posterity.
This is the one with the whales.
For posterity, I think we need to do a little mini summary, okay? Just, because that's the format, right? We have a format. Okay. So, fresh out of Star Trek 3, which we're not fresh out of Star Trek 3. That was many, many moons ago. But that was actually, I don't give out too many stats, but that's still our most popular. It's the #1 downloaded episode of Starfleet Boy is the Star Trek 3 on the podcast.
Wow.
Yeah. Emma. It's because of Emma.
That's right. Damn straight.
So anyway, Star Trek. Oh, wait. What's that on your... Is that James T. Kirk? But that's like Star Trek 6 Kirk, right?
Well, I don't have any Star Trek 3 figures.
Oh, or Star Trek 4.
So all of the figures I have here today will be inappropriate to the movie, but it's the best I could do.
We get easily distracted here on Starfleet Boy. Apologies. Okay, so Star Trek 4, fresh out of Star Trek 3, the crew of the Enterprise, after having successfully rescued and resurrected Spock, are now stranded on Vulcan for a little while they refit their captured Klingon vessel to go back and face trial for the crime of basically treason against the United Federation of Planets and Starfleet. So they're all facing court-martial, and kind of I think they're like, all right, well, it was worth it. We've had a few good. We've had quite a few good runs. I mean,
yeah,
it was okay. So anyways, we get reintroduced to Spock, who is the same but different. He's just slightly off. He's even more logical than we knew him to be. He doesn't seem to have carried a lot of the. He's kind of back to square one Spock, I guess, if you will, like however we meet Spock in the original series TV show. And then we are kind of I forgot the best part. The film opens with this strange probe from outer space.
That's right.
That's like incapacitating anything with an electronic pulse. So yeah, basically there's this probe heading towards Earth. We don't know why. Ooh, what's that? That's Spock.
That's Spock. Oh, this is Spock. This is actually from Star Trek 3.
Oh, nice.
It's a Taco Bell
computer. More illumination. Ah, that's better.
It's a Taco Bell display. So go ahead. So the alien probe.
So the alien probe is on its way to Earth, and it seems to be draining energy from anything electronic. So starships are, left with basic life support, if then, and then it even in the later scene is shown to incapacitate the entire starbase that's orbiting Earth. Anyways, it starts to do some kind of attack on Earth's environment through the oceans, and it doesn't look good for planet Earth. It seems like the probe's just gonna create havoc and kill everything on the planet. Meanwhile, back on Vulcan, Spock is taking a little test. He's trying to make sure his brain isn't rusty and all the knowledge has been successfully restored through the blender that is Dr. McCoy's mind, and he encounters a problem when the computer asks him, "How do you feel?" So, Spock's kind of has a conversation with his mother, and he decides, I have to go back with my fellow crewmates to stand testimony. And she's like, "Well, why would you have to go with them?" And he's like, "Because I was there," which is interesting because she thinks it's because of friendship, but which it is, of course, but he says,
well, she's testing him. Yeah.
she's testing him, exactly. So Spock goes back with the crew, and they intercept all these crazy distress calls from everywhere. And there's a lot of great gags in this movie, which hopefully we'll get to cover in our discussion. But then the crew encounter the problem at hand, which is this probe that's attacking Earth. And so through a really beautiful kind of journey of discovering that the probe is trying to contact whales, they decide to time warp back in time to 1986.
Mm-hmm.
And
a great time.
Yeah, great time, and rescue 2 humpback whales. Well, they didn't know there was going to be 2 at the time, but to rescue humpback whales and bring them back to the future, and hopefully the whales will communicate with the probe and the attack on Earth will cease, and they'll hence be able to save their planet. And they do it.
Yes, they do.
It's kind of awesome. So yeah, they successfully bring back a pair of humpback whales. We meet the wonderful Dr. Jillian Taylor, and she becomes a time refugee and is brought back to the future, and then we don't never see her again. But that's okay. At least not on screen. I know there's a lot of
on screen, right, yeah.
There's a lot of
several other appearances.
appearances, yeah. Anyways, Star Trek 4 is probably one of my favorite films. It's actually quite appropriate that we're recording behind the scenes here on Father's Day, because it's a Father's Day tradition in our household to watch this film.
Really?
Yeah. My dad loves Star Trek 4. It's it's the only movie he likes. No, I'm just kidding. He likes a lot of Star Trek movies, but he really loves Star Trek 4. He's always asking to have it put on.
It is. I think for a time it was. Well, I think it might still be the most popular Star Trek film,
and with good reason. There's a lot. I have a lot of thoughts about Star Trek 4, so I guess we'll jump. Well, what did you think of the summary? Did I miss anything?
No, I think you sailed through it perfectly. Thank you.
Sailed through it. Yes.
Yeah, there we go. Exactly. Sailed, swam through it like the humpback whale.
So over the course of the many years, you can imagine I've seen this movie since its Father's Day tradition, at least every year since it's come out.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah. It's like Home Alone is a Christmas tradition for many families. I think Star Trek 4 is a Father's Day tradition in my family.
It came out
1986.
1986, yeah. I've seen it many times. I think it's worth mentioning also, I think it's fortuitous that we're doing it today, because while I was driving this morning, I heard a report that you can look up online right now. There have been, for the first time in almost a century, humpback whales have been spotted in New York's East River.
Wow. That's amazing. So I guess we could just go straight to the big picture here. Star Trek 4 is, I think it's popular, of course, because of the subject matter and the humor. There's a lot of humor in the film, but also I think for me, I remember it as being a pivotal film in the cause at the time. For to eliminate or at least mitigate man-produced extinction of animals, and specifically the focus was on whales, as you saw in the film, in those brutal examples when when Jillian is delivering that kind of speech to the tour. It's a wonderful way to do this, to expose all of us watching the film to what was going on in terms of the whaling industry. But in that scene, she's explaining it on this tour, which was going on in aquariums all over the United States at this time. There was a lot of activism regarding the environment and especially whales, and Star Trek took that cause, which is kind of awesome. but I remember Star Trek being really impactful in the marketing, in the way that it was like the stars all went out and talked about this issue. And I don't remember, I'm sure that this was done before with other films where a film took an activist stance, but I personally, in my experience, don't remember a film as popular as the Star Trek franchise doing something like this. I thought it was really huge at the
Yeah.
time, and it was a big deal. And I feel like, maybe it's a little presumptuous, but I think Star Trek helped to change the wave, or change the tide, as it were, as far as opinion is concerned, and more people became aware of the plight of the whales and other animals. I think I remember as a kid, bald eagles was like a thing. Bald eagles were almost extinct. The national bird
Right.
it was almost gone. Like there was a chance, and now, thank goodness they've been brought back to healthy populations, which goes to show that we can have both a positive or a negative impact. Because if we can bring a species back from the brink of extinction, imagine what else we can do as humans. So
Yeah. Well, the story that I heard on NPR this morning, the the scientist that they were interviewing was actually saying how happy he was that, for once it's an environmental story that's good news, because so often in the news, when you hear environmentally themed stories, it's about how the earth is going to crap, and it's bad news. But here was an example of good news, and it was funny that I heard that this morning, knowing we were going to do Star Trek 4, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is something cosmic going on here. But I agree with you. I think definitely Star Trek 4 brought a lot of awareness, certainly to the cause of the idea of cornerstone species. These species that, if you lose this one, there's a pyramid, and then all of this falls apart. And
I think, obviously, species have been coming in and out of existence on this planet, for many millions of years. But I think that the distinction here is that we, as a species ourselves, humans, need to realize that we've reached a level of sophistication and prowess, and just like dominance, if you will, over our planet. And there's a heavy responsibility that comes with that, by just that virtue of how much we're able to shape our world. We then have the greatest responsibility of what that world looks like and continues to look like. And if we could minimize or delay the impact, I mean, these things probably will happen on this planet over a natural course of time, had humans not evolved to where we are, you know what I mean? But we now are at a place where we need to realize, oh yeah, like burning fossil fuels and changing the atmospheric composition of our planet more rapidly than it would have done so naturally could have terrible impacts on repercussions for ourselves. And I think it's kind of a, to be Spock for a moment, it's a very logical thing. If you think about it, there's a very clear cause effect consequence. Like, that doesn't, you don't need a fancy degree to see it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Although some people don't see it.
Right, and whoever said the human race was logical, as Jillian says.
There we go, exactly. But certainly in 1986, you and I were of that impressionable age where I think a movie like this really had a huge impact, and just informed our thinking. I remember when I was a kid, there were these things called safari cards. Do you remember safari cards?
That's like vaguely something that sounds familiar.
It was like these cards that you would subscribe, and you would get like a pack of like 12, and they would have an animal, and each card would be about an animal. And I remember I recall that there was a map, and the map would show you like where they were. And there was a subset of the safari cards about animal species that were kind of like on the bubble. They were near extinction, and
Oh, wow.
those made such a huge impact on me. And then things like Star Trek 4, and we can't take for granted that one day that we'll always have the elephant, the cheetah, the giraffe. I think I've heard recently that the cheetah is near extinction now, which is not something I recalled when I was a kid. So yeah, all this is very relevant, and Star Trek, obviously, the original show was never shy of taking on big topics, and certainly Star Trek 4 is an example of the movies continuing in that tradition that the series had of dealing with a subject that is relevant to the society, to that audience at the time.
In addition to being a sort of film that brings awareness to this huge cause of the environment, of overuse of resources, all these things are bound into this major kind of theme here. But it also is the continuation of, I think, a trilogy. In a sense, it's the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's the end cap of a bigger arc, which I think started in Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, and Star Trek 4. I look at them as like a kind of mini, kind of a trilogy. And then Star Trek 1 through 6 is a saga. I mean, like, I think it's safe to say even Star Trek 5, as I grow older, I embrace its lightheartedness.
It's a conversation for another
time. Yes, it's true. But I think that's a awesome kind of thing that I didn't really always tune into when I was younger, and now looking at it, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. It's like, and in terms of time, I think there's maybe like quite a bit of time passes between the motion picture and Star Trek 2, but 2, 3, and 4 just like boom, 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 like right after each other. So it is one big kind of crazy adventure when you look at it.
Well, when you really think about it, Star Trek 4 represents really the last time that Kirk and crew are Star Trek by themselves. Because by the time we get to Star Trek 5, it's 1989,
and we have it's you're right, Star Trek: The Next Generation.
And Next Generation has been on the air for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And Next Generation came on like gangbusters. It wasn't just a show that was on every Saturday, but obviously you had the accompanying novels, you had the accompanying comic book series, toys. So Next Generation just hit like a storm. And Star Trek 4 is the last time that Kirk and crew are the sole focus of Star Trek fandom. That they are, in a sense, it's the last time they are the future. Because by the time we get to Star Trek 5 and obviously in Star Trek 6, they're kind of the past of the future.
It's true.
We don't look at them as being,
that's trippy, but it's true.
Charting. Yeah, it is. It's interesting. So it's not only the end of a trilogy, but it's also the end of, I think, it's almost the end of their run. Even though they had 2 more films and Kirk had 3 more films, It's really the end of that era. In a way, it's the end of that era of Star Trek, because after Star Trek 4, we had so much more, so many more stories in Star Trek added all of a sudden, and it had nothing to do with Kirk and Spock and this crew that we grew up with.
The film opens with the dedication to the Challenger crew, and we should have actually talked about that first off. Sorry. But that was like a really tragic moment for the world, and I think that's something that was personally very like traumatic for our generation as well, especially my poor sister. The Challenger disaster happened on her birthday, so it's like she's kind of always, it's like the unfortunate people who during any world tragedy that's memorable, that happen to have their birthdays on that day. It's the worst. But the Challenger disaster was something really impactful, and I think that was a big deal at the time as well. And we were in a time of great turmoil in the 80s that I didn't realize as a kid. I think I was very sheltered from it, but when I read back in history and look at the end of the Cold War and just sort of everything that was going on in terms of the nuclear crisis, which the film, that's amazing. Star Trek kind of like the Star Trek 4 kind of just like says, hey guys, here's a time capsule of the 80s. And it just preserves a lot of like ideas and notions from that time. It's kind of an interesting thing. But my point, which I've lost.
Oh, you're talking about the Challenger.
Yeah, it's talking about the Challenger. That was like a nice way to open this film. I thought it was a really good thing. And then we get the iconic music, and we've got this brand new kind of different opening. And it's almost kind of like I think it's Leonard Roseman is the composer. And actually that was one of the first albums I ever bought, was on a record. I have the Star Trek 4 soundtrack.
Oh.
Yeah, we still have it. I don't have a record player to play it on anymore, so but
what's the cover? Is it the film?
It's the orange, the cool orange where it's the bird of prey, I think, is swooping down
really nice.
at the Earth, nice. And then the word Star Trekker. Should totally. The show is interactive after all. We can probably find it. But anyways, his music is great. It's kind of celebratory in the beginning there. That kind of percussive, exclamatory kind of theme that you get in the beginning, and then again at the end when everyone's kind of celebrating after the whales successfully communicate with the probe. And the music in general is great, and it's different from what's his name?
Horner.
James Horner. Thank you.
James Horner?
It's so different from James. Yeah, James Horner did Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 3.
Right. And then Goldsmith did
Star Trek Motion Picture.
Right.
And then Leonard Roseman does this one. Star Trek 5 is Jerry Goldsmith again, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful. We know that. And then Star Trek 6 is, why can't I remember?
Is Cliff Idleman.
It was in my database, just a little slow. Yeah. So great soundtracks, all the Star Trek movies. Star Trek 5, for if it has one highlight, is definitely the score.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I'm actually going to be a little controversial here and say that Star Trek 4 is probably my least favorite score of not that I don't like it, but I think it's the one that I listen to the least outside of the film. I would actually say I never listened to it.
Was that smooth jazz too much for you?
You
know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, I do.
Is that too much? You couldn't handle it?
It just doesn't feel like Star Trek to me. It really doesn't.
It's so good.
I don't. Oh, there we go.
There. This is the. Hold on, I gotta share with everyone. Present to everyone. This is the cover for the LP, the soundtrack cover, and it's awesome. I forgot the Bird of Prey is not even in it. It's just Star Trek is
right, but it's going in like the Bird of Prey.
The Prey, yeah. So there you go.
That's
I can't say Star Trek 4 is my favorite soundtrack either. So I'm not arguing with you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll tell you right now. I have 6. I have Nemesis. Somewhere else I have 2 and 3 even, but I don't own Star Trek 4. I have to admit that's the score I don't own, because I see it as very much connected with the film, but I don't enjoy it outside of the film too much. I mean, obviously it goes great with the film. I mean, you just mentioned the ending where they're all in the water and the music is very celebratory, and it's absolutely true. I mean, it is a fun score. I mean, when Chekhov, when they're getting Chekhov out of the when
Oh yeah,
they're
and
through
there's
the hospital,
the hospital chase scene and
very
like all of that.
playful
Yeah, it's true.
music and um
It is a very original score, especially if you because James Horner had such a huge impact, and they actually reference in the the opening when you see the Paramount logo, you do hear that little kind of chimey sort of
yeah.
James Horner thing, and then you hear the Star Trek theme, ba 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 ba, and then da da da. Whoa, sorry. Uh,
Oh,
Sometimes that happens. Uh, and then it goes da 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 bum 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 bum, and then this whole thing that again it's so pronounced. But then what I love about the score is um it also really beautifully like kind of accentuates and goes along with a couple of scenes that stand out in my mind. But the one in the beginning when we're kind of the summary skipped a lot of things so that we could just talk about it. But in the beginning, you have this scene with the Klingon ambassador arguing for the extradition of Admiral Kirk. It's crazy, kind of, when you think about all the stuff that they threw into this movie, just like that and to have a discussion about it. Like, I don't know, I have a lot. There's a lot. I feel like this is going to be a long one, Doctor. But in those scenes, especially when the Klingon ambassador finally he gets into this discussion, and we have Ambassador Sarek comes in, and he's like, Klingon justice is a unique perspective, and all this like kind of banter, which is amazing, by the way, Mark Leonard, between the two of them. You then have him storming off, and when he does, I just still to this day remember that music. It's so like punctuating of that scene, and like you really feel the drama of what's going on. Like when Captain Kirk comes home, what he's faced with is like it's kind of huge. Like he's being accused of breaking all kinds of treaties and all kinds of like laws between the Federation and the Klingons. The Genesis thing is on a it's blown up to a huge scale. Like the Klingons think that they're totally taking the line in Star Trek 3 that the Federation is actually like secretly using Genesis as a weapon, and they're gonna annihilate the Klingon people. And so there's all these like cool kind of sub stories going on. But I think that that's what I remember about the soundtrack, is that in all these like certain scenes, you just get this like operatic boom.
it's true. It's
And
true. I
the
mean,
whale fugue, even like I remember, I
yeah,
remember a lot of the music. But you're absolutely right; it's totally associated with it's strongly associated with the imagery in the film.
it is. He truly is underscoring what is happening in the film. And actually, he scored another film that I like a lot, which is RoboCop 2.
Oh,
And it has again, it's not at all like the original score. I mean, the score of the original film, but he really just underscores everything very well. And it's hard to remember Star Trek 4, the imagery, without the music. And it does kind of lay out the playful tone of the movie. The movie is fun. We have to put it in context of what happened in the last three films. Star Trek 1 was a bit dour.
yeah. Well,
Star
it's
Trek
very
2,
serious. Yeah.
yeah, Star Trek 2 obviously, killed Spock, which is traumatic. And then Star Trek 3, we destroy the Enterprise, we kill David. Spock comes back to us, but he's sort of, dazed and confused. And Star Trek 4 was a much needed shot of levity. And the score, I think, helps put you in that tone. And, one of the best parts is I love skipping right to the end of the movie, the end credits. Do you remember how the end credits, it's just, it's all these scenes. They just show us all these scenes. And
kind of rehashing the
right. It's like a montage of and you have that one. I mean, you leave the theater thinking, wow, that was wonderful. So I don't want to take away from the score. I think it's a
no, of course,
great score, for that movie. I just have to say I don't listen to it
What's
out of the
your
movie.
only
To
original
be honest.
series? Only original series scores. I think it's fine if we do this. I don't know if you agree. What's your ranking? If you could kind of just off the top of your head, rank go from least favorite to save your favorite for the end for the last.
Oof. 6.
Is your least? I'm saying
No,
least favorite.
my
Oh,
favorite.
I said go
Oh,
least
you're
favorite to
oh,
favorite.
oh,
Okay,
okay.
but
Least
go the
favorite.
other way. You already gave the reveal, so it's so Star Trek 6 is your favorite. We'll
The
start
Star Trek
there.
is my favorite, and then I have to admit, 5 is a very good score.
5 is a really good score.
5 is a very good score, and then I would have to say 2, and then 3, and then 1, and then 4.
Wow. I think that I'm exactly the same, except that I put Star Trek.
Forgetting?
No, you're good.
Okay.
I'm exactly the same order as you, except that I'm swapping Star Trek 3 and Star Trek 1. So I like Star Trek
1 higher than 3.
higher than 3, yeah.
You know what? I'll go with that.
Really?
You're right. 1 is higher. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, otherwise I agree with you on the order.
Okay, yeah. No, you're
100%.
right. Yeah, 1 is better than 3.
All right.
Yeah.
That settles it.
There we go.
What else can we talk about? Let's see.
Well, one thing I think we have to talk about is that it's the last appearance of Savick.
Oh, well, yeah. Of Savick Part 2.
Savick Part 2. I don't have that figure. I only have.
Is there a figure of Robin?
know.
Is it Robin Curtis? I believe is the name.
Robin Curtis. No, yeah, they decided to make the figure of Christy Alley, but I don't know if there's a Robin Curtis figure.
I'd like to point out that one of the most delightful moments, personally, between you and I, was when we watched the Star Trek when Star Trek 4 came out, like on DVD or I forget what it was, with commentary.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember watching Leonard Nimoy's commentary? Which, by the way, fans, now that he's departed, especially, I think it's wonderful to as a fan to like go back and just like listen to him because he's delightful. He's just constantly laughing in the in the soundtrack, and he reveals a lot about the gags and he's very focused on the gags in the film. They worked.
Yeah. Just so the fans know, the people listening, I would buy the DVDs and I would drive. You know, you lived so frickin' far. I would drive all the way out to the neutral zone and bring the DVDs, and we would sit and we would just spend a day
just
watching the movies with the commentaries because.
Why not?
Well, I mean, that was a huge deal for us, is to get these commentaries and to listen to listening to Shatner, his commentary over Star Trek 5.
I know, it's pretty awesome too.
Like, we need to hear what was he thinking. But yeah, 4 was a great one. 3 and 4 were great. Those are great memories watching those with you.
Leonard Nimoy's second directorial Star Trek film. They gave him 2 in a row. Right? He directed this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So I just said that, and oh my God, Doctor, it's been a long day.
It's all right. It's the LDS.
It's the LDS, Doctor.
So Savick. We're talking about Savick.
Yes, we were talking about Savick. Go on.
Well, it's her last appearance in the films, and it's kind of surprising because when you watch Star Trek 2, you kind of got the impression that we had Savick now, we had David. Are we building towards a new generation, shall we say? And then, of course, all that is just kind of obliterated.
Oh, completely obliterated. It's true.
In Star Trek 4, we have a very almost cold, somewhat awkward goodbye between Spock and Savick. Now, what we learned, I think, in the commentary is what you were alluding to, was that Savick is pregnant with Spock's child.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And
actually, we've talked about this before. We talked about it on our Star Trek 3 discussion, I think.
yeah, and the reason that she is staying behind on Vulcan with Spock's mom is because she's
She's
pregnant,
gonna have his child.
his
Well,
child,
they
and
did.
and yeah,
It makes complete sense in Star Trek 3. It's the Ponfar, you know, was
hmm
initiated, and and obviously it's fruitful. I don't know if that's ever. I think that. Do you think that looking at Star Trek as a saga, right? We don't
hmm
see Savick again in our main, you know, like the purest canon is just the films
right,
and TV shows by themselves, right? Like we agree
right.
on that, right? So just because they go away and we never see them again doesn't mean that that story didn't happen. That's now the expanded universe. Did it happen? Did they write about it? Like, is there comics? Like, did Savick actually in the expanded universe have a baby? And like, is there a Spock child out there? Like,
There is a Spock child out there.
yep.
I don't remember who the mom is. I think it's a different.
Oh, it's not even Savick.
Right, it's not even Savik's. Because I don't think the Savick subplot, her being the mother of his child, was even known
Oh,
at the
right.
time.
In
Well, I
the
think we found out about it much later. So
yeah,
I there may be comics or stuff now, but certainly if you read the novelization, part
Star-
3,
oh yeah.
they were setting it up for Savick and David to be together.
Oh, that's right.
And when you watch Star Trek 3, it's not really there, but you can maybe. I mean,
There's a fondness, there's a closeness, like
yeah,
in the portrayals. I think I see it. I see it
it's
in Star Trek
it's
3.
it's kind of there. I mean, there's room to have expanded it if David hadn't been killed, certainly. So I think that whole subplot was not something that was very well known. And when you read the comics, actually, this is an interesting sidebar. There was an ongoing Star Trek comic book series during the time of Star Trek's 2, 3, and 4. So Star Trek had the same problem as Star Wars, which is that you get to the ending of Star Trek 3, and where, of course, Star Trek 4 is what happened, really.
Mm-hmm.
But the comics don't know that because it's just still
Right, so
several
they
years
have
away.
to.
So what they did is simply Star Trek 3 happened, and Kirk and the Enterprise Kirk and crew just go back to Starfleet, and there's no repercussions for anything that was done. And they end up getting the Excelsior.
Oh,
And Kirk is actually captaining the Excelsior, and Savick is aboard, and
that would have been
Spock gets
such
his
a
own ship.
weird. Wow.
So it becomes a problem because obviously when we get to Star Trek 4, the comic book series now has to somehow create a scenario where Kirk and crew have to wind up back on Vulcan with the Klingon bird of prey ship and Spock debilitated mentally.
That's
And
really
they
weird.
actually come up with this crazy plot where Spock is affected by this bizarre virus that is actually running havoc in the Romulan Empire.
Wow.
And Spock is turned into he's basically lost everything. So they have to go back to Vulcan, and they contrive this way that they do so on the bird of prey, which they've just happened to have had in the Excelsior docking bay all this time, and that's how they. So it's just like, hoops through, jumping through all these hoops.
I feel like
just
that's no longer suspending your disbelief. That's like throwing your disbelief into outer space. Like
just
just go with us on this. Trust us. We'll get you back to Star Trek 4. It's like
right. So imagine.
It's
So
funny.
yeah. So yeah. Savik's. Yeah. That was not even part of it. They had so many other weird
That's an
things.
interesting That's an interesting conundrum. Does that still happen? These days, I feel like there's
No.
tighter control over
Yeah,
the the way pictures are going.
the ancillary. Yeah,
Yeah.
Star Wars. Like I said, Star Wars had a lot to deal with after Empire Strikes Back. There were, and actually even the Alien movies. That's another example. There's whole scores of stories with Ripley and Newt and what's his name, Hicks, only to get to Alien 3 and they died. Yeah, in the first 2 minutes of that movie.
That's right.
So it's like, okay, so all of that was just a dream that Newt had. So the comic books are constantly, it's almost a thankless task. You're carrying the baton, and you're there's certainly a dedicated fan base, but it could all get thrown out at any moment, which is why it's always considered expanded universe, because you never know what's going to get thrown out. I mean,
A lot of people do get attached to the expanded universe. I remember the first purge in this. If we're going to talk about Star Wars for a second here, I think Star Trek's been kinder to its expanded universe in some ways. I don't know if that's just my opinion or what, but I remember there was like a massive purge of the expanded universe where George Lucas kind of just said, "Hey guys, like all of that is not canon," and
right.
I was like, he just kind of was like, "Don't pay attention to it."
Yeah, he just crapped all over
it. But
yeah.
Which is his right to do.
Yes, of course. No, absolutely.
But then now in Star Wars, you do see a lot of the EU characters coming back in Star Wars Rebels. One of my favorite EU characters, Grand Admiral Thrawn,
who started
in the EU. So
right.
Cool.
Oh,
interesting. Yeah. I wonder if for the so Star Trek 4, back to Star Trek 4. I wrote down some of my favorite, I guess, some observations about the film. And what I noticed structurally is that it does kind of have it does feel like a novel, in that it has like, the kind of intro, there's like the meat of it, and then you have the conclusion, which is, yay, we saved the earth. But then there's this beautiful afterword, and that all includes, that includes like the trial at last. And I love that in the scene you have this kind of very like serious tone, and they're all standing there, they're getting ready to be court-martialed, and then the president of the Federation says, due to some mitigating circumstances, all charges save for one have been summarily dismissed. And it's a tearjerker, that part, when Captain Kirk is given a demotion, but it's actually the best thing that could have happened to his character, is he's given back command of a starship. And then we get, of course, that wonderful reveal of the Enterprise NCC 1701A.
Yeah.
And then Kirk's like, what does he say? Let's see what she's got.
Do you remember what your thoughts were when you saw that bridge?
I think I was just like, 1986, just to put it into perspective, I was a kid. How old was I? I was still in elementary school. So, probably like 6th grade or 5th grade. Or no, actually 4th grade, probably. It was 4th grade. Anyways, we went to see it at this old style, what we consider now old style, but at the time cutting edge movie theater, that big movie theater that was across the street from Dadeland Mall, for those of you who live in Miami and are old enough to remember it. Anyways, it had a mezzanine level. It was like huge, and it had this
theater,
enormous screen, really big screen, so big.
It was a 2-screener. There was only 2 screens on that.
There's only 2, yeah. And
phenomenally huge, yeah.
Saw it with my father, which was kind of cool. And that was the first time I ever saw it. And I do remember thinking at the end scene, there was no like actual thought, it was just pure emotion as a kid. It was just like, oh my god. Like, it's right, I guess you could call that a nerdgasm now or something, but I was just not in a state of, I was just in a state of like, I was completely in the moment, and that was an awesome thing to get to see a new bridge, and like, yay, thank God they're not gonna get a freighter or the Excelsior, or whatever. I would have still watched Star Trek, but you can't have Captain Kirk without the Enterprise. Which is, it's interesting where we can have a little discussion about the state of what's happened to the Enterprise, like, in all of Star Trek. Have we reached is the E the last story in the Enterprise? Will we ever get another future a future story? One never knows.
The adventure continues.
It does indeed.
The human adventure continues, right?
I do remember a lot of discussion after the film, especially when we met in our later on in high school. We used to have a lot of discussion where we would challenge we did this for everything, like all the Star Trek movies. We would challenge the story, or challenge the continuity, or how could this possibly happen? And oftentimes it was my task to come up with, I don't know why I was that person, but I was somehow tasked with having to defend the continuity, and I would come up with the wildest theories, like they were just out of control to defend it. But one of the theories that I couldn't come up with, and I don't know if it was a fan theory or if it was released from official channels somewhere in Paramount, but a lot of fans wondered this: how the heck did they have an Enterprise A ready to go so quickly? Or is this like a jump?
That's in the book.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, so we find out later that I think it was the Yorktown or something.
I'll tell you right now.
And they recommission it like in a hurry. They're just like, sorry, crew, whoever was captaining it before, or it was being built for another crew or something like that.
No, there it is. Scotty's Guide to the Enterprise.
Oh, is that where I got it from?
That's where you got it from.
That's awesome. So I love that there's even explanations for things in Star Trek. Usually there's a really good solid explanation for for whatever you can imagine. If I didn't come up with it, it was definitely from official channels.
Yes, it was supposed to be the USS T-Ho.
T-Ho, wow.
T-I-Ho. It was not a Constitution refit, but it was built new from keel up.
Ooh.
And it says here her permanent hull registry number was going to be NCC 1798.
Oh.
Simulations took place, which verified the effectiveness of her transwarp drive. Then, on September 21st, 2222,
they have the date.
T-Ho returned from her deep space trials. The Whale Song crisis took place. Admiral James T. Kirk and his command crew, who had stolen and then destroyed Enterprise, returned to Earth, blah, blah, blah. In further gratitude, Starfleet elected to return Kirk to the position of Starship Commander, and he was given a new ship. T-Ho was rechristened Enterprise, and her hull registry was changed to NCC 1701-A.
That's awesome. I love that the Enterprise, the end of the A's story is that she's decommissioned, and she's probably in a space museum by the time we get to the Next Generation. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that a young everyone, Captain Picard, Commander Riker, Wesley, even at some point, just imagine that they boarded that bridge and looked around, and it's like, it is cool that the original series crew are icons even in the universe of Star Trek. Like,
yeah, well,
that like they're not just.
How many times have they saved the damn planet?
I know, it's insane. It's insane.
I think it's worth mentioning that Star Trek 4 bears remarkable resemblance to Star Trek 1 in the sense that it's this gigantic probe that comes to Earth.
What's the backstory on the probe? Do you know?
Yes, the probe. Well, that's actually a very interesting story in and of itself. There was a sequel novel that I think you'll recall.
Called The Probe, I think, right?
Called Probe.
Yeah.
Now, when we both read it, we didn't know the backstory of that. For that, I take out another book from my library up here, one I rarely use, which is called Voyages of Imagination,
Ooh,
which is a book about all the novels of Star Trek. And I was consulting it right before we were going to go on the air here, so to speak.
that's so
And
exciting.
apparently, the book is credited to a Margaret Warner Bonanno, but she in fact has disavowed the novel.
Oh,
Um, it says that the original manuscript, which is entitled "Music of the Spheres," was rejected by the studio when Gene Roddenberry's office took issue with certain characterizations in the book. This eventually led the editor of the line to get somebody else to effectively rewrite the novel.
wow.
And to this day, it's like a sore spot for the author. And I believe she goes into, I haven't checked it yet, but she goes into it on her site about all the changes they made. But the novel,
Wow.
as presented, basically has the scenario that the probe, after the events of Star Trek 4, and actually after the events of Star Trek 5 even, makes its way to Romulan space. And that's where we pick up with the probe again. And there's negotiations going on between Starfleet, between the Federation and the Romulans, and that probe becomes a contentious issue. And we learn that the probe, at one point, and this is what got a lot of people excited, at one point encountered some race that tried to assimilate it and therefore damaged it.
Oh,
And this damage has to do with the fact that it really doesn't see humanoid species at all. All it sees are whales and whatnot. And the novel I thought it was a great novel. I liked it. Um,
I
and
don't
there's a
recall.
lot.
I don't recall reading it now that you mention all those things because all
Really?
that seems new to me. Yeah, I
Oh,
thought I read it, but I read so many Star Trek books. There's a lot in there.
there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of headcanon. Um, but the novel, there's a line I know where I think it's actually Bones uh, and Spock, and they theorize what kind of race it was, and perhaps they had something to do with the people that built V'ger and all that stuff. And something something in the text there, you realize that they're talking about the Borg. And
That's
it's
interesting.
interesting to speculate that that probe at one point resisted attempts to be assimilated by the Borg, but sustained heavy damage. And again, going back to what I said before, that novel came out much later, and it was a time when Next Generation had already started. So already you see in that novel how Kirk and company are the past. They're no longer the vanguard of the Star Trek history. They're not leading the changes in Star Trek history. Their backstory and Next Generation is the present for the fans, so to speak. And so there we see, the Borg is now being retro. What do you call it? Being inserted into
Well, yeah,
classic
I mean, even
Star
Enterprise,
Trek.
I think Enterprise even kind of takes that further and just kind of even it validates Star Trek First Contact. I guess that leads me to an interesting subject of time travel. There's a lot of time travel happening in Star Trek in general.
Yeah,
If you think about it, you know, the Star Trek 4, and let's just look at just the films alone. You have Star Trek 4 in which they time travel to the past, change a bunch of things so that the future is saved, and then you have Star Trek First Contact that does the same exact thing, but just you know, it deals with a different idea, but still they
and then you have the
and then you have
Star Trek,
the,
which
the
is
rebooted Star Trek, which is all based on Spock time traveling and dimensionally traveling, possibly. Who knows?
Hmm.
Uh,
Right.
so yeah, it's a crazy kind of way that Star Trek deals with time.
Yeah.
um, I don't know if I agree with the idea of putting the Borg into the probe story, though. I kind of liked the film. For me, gives me the impression that the probe is really ancient, and it checks in like every once in a while to make sure that for whatever reason, whales are on Earth. And it's possible that it, like, the last time it checked in could have been, it's interesting to think that, like, since there are interesting and weird, let's pull my hair up to become the alien conspiracy guy for a second. But it's interesting to imagine, because we have so many weird, like if you look at the Aztecs and some of their depictions, you could see how they're like, wow, that kind of looks science fiction-y there. It's got like a weird, that guy looks like he's wearing a spacesuit. Or that looks like a rocket. And then in some of the ancient Indian texts and things like that, there's like spaceship chariot looking things. So it's fun to imagine that this probe could have actually appeared in Earth's past, checked in on the whales, inspired humans to travel to the stars, and now it's back again. But this time, it catches up on Earth's history, so to speak, and the probe is having a response, which is, oh, they can't even. They've lost balance, on the planet. So let me just eradicate this world because it's not worthy. And in a way, that's an interesting thing because it's played beautifully in the film. The characters, the crew of the Enterprise, and even you can just take their reaction and kind of expand it to the whole culture of the future here. But they don't really know what humpbacks are. They think of whales as mythological. It just speaks to me that in the future of Star Trek, unfortunately there have been all these repercussions. As we know, there was a Third World War. There was like all these like horrible things in the past of Star Trek that we know about, the eugenics wars and things like that. So there's no whales in the future. There's probably a lot of animals that are extinct. They probably don't know what like so many species that we take for granted are. Maybe in the future everything's synthetic, yada yada yada, right? And it's this idea now that like that's maybe let's correct the error that the humans made, and so Kirk and crew are left to that responsibility. They have to. They have no other choice. They have to like get home.
Hmm.
So if bringing whales back to the future is the only way, let's do it. And I think it's a nice idea that this probe has nothing to do with anything but these whales. Like its sole purpose is to make sure that whales are on these planets, and there might be many planets that have whales.
Well,
Yeah.
the novelization of the movie, which proposes a different scenario, and actually, I have to say, I recommend the audiobook
Oh.
novelization because it's read by George Takei,
Oh, very nice.
who does wonderful impersonations of Scotty, of Zarek,
Really?
of the Klingon,
The
who is there
ambassador?
at the ambassador, and actually even Chekhov. And then, interestingly enough, there are sections that are in first person. And most of the novel is third person, but then there are these first person passages, and those are read by Leonard Nimoy.
Oh.
So you're given insight into Spock's mind at the different times when that happens. And it's interestingly, the novel alludes to an encounter where Spock, earlier in his life, went for a swim and on Earth. I guess maybe swimming is probably not something that's very common on Vulcan.
Well, it doesn't look like there's a lot of water on Vulcan. At
Yeah.
least not on the surface.
Right. So I guess it was a novel thing to, experience that. And he's actually he's caught in a current, and he's Vulcan. He doesn't really know what to do. And he is he he is sought out by, he senses another presence, another mind out there,
Mm.
and it's a dolphin. And the dolphin kind of, brings him back to a safer part of the water. And I guess it's an interesting passage because it implies that the dolphin and Spock had a sort of mini mind meld moment, and Spock learned of the whale songs because the dolphins remember the whale songs from the
Oh,
original whales.
very nice.
But of course, they can't sing the songs, but they remember the songs. And that is perhaps the reason why in the film, you have to wonder, how is it, like, because you just said, Kirk and crew, they don't know what humpback whales are, but yet Spock is the one who makes the connection. Wait a minute, I know something that sounds like this. And then he goes to a Klingon computer database.
Well, no, they established, so in the beginning, I love this kind of these kind of details.
This is where, okay, I know what you're gonna do. Go ahead.
In the beginning, when they're first ready to take off from Vulcan, I think Sulu, if I'm not mistaken, is the one that says we've successfully interfaced with Federation computers. So that data, so technically that database,
good save.
It's a Federation database. But also, if I remember how that scene just played out, because it's a little fresh in my mind, I did do like snippets of the film recently, like, where I just kind of like watched certain scenes that were my favorites, and that's one of my favorite scenes, is like that development of that figuring out the whales. And it was exciting as a moviegoer because I had no idea as a kid what the heck was going on. So as they're revealing all these things to you, you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
But as I recall, it was interesting because Spock does seem to guess, come out with the idea through a guess of some sort. But I think in the movie they say, well, the probe's intensity is directed at Earth's oceans, and that also could have been a trigger for why he would, that along with the dolphin adventure.
Right. But it could have meant any number of things, but he just like humpback whales.
No, he doesn't go to humpback whales. He just thinks, what is it, until Uhura, it is, you're right.
Wow.
It's when Uhura plays by the way, that's also a great scene too in terms of sound design, when she's manipulating the frequency to place it underwater, and that whole process of like, you hear it like breaking down, like
at pressure,
adding
water,
salinity, all these cool things, that they're doing. So that was also a really great scene. And then you have, what I find is hilarious is just Dr. McCoy is hilarious throughout this entire film. He's in rare form in Star Trek 4. I think he's just so awesome. And DeForest Kelley, I think recently was the anniversary of his birth, so it's sad that he's no longer able to grace us with his beautiful acting skills, but also he is the real McCoy.
Absolutely.
Carl Urban does an awesome job, but the real McCoy is always going to be DeForest Kelley. But he has that I love that scene where they're having the whole discussion. Spock finds the whale and he's like, oh, we have to do this. They're only available in Earth of the past. And, like, that's when Kirk totally is on board. Like, he gets it. He's like, all right, this is what we got to do. But it takes Dr. McCoy a minute. He goes, I thought you said that these whales were only in Earth of the past. And then Spock's like, yes, Doctor. That is exactly what I said. And then you see McCoy go, now wait a goddamn minute. That's
wonderful.
Classic interplay, Kirk, Spock, McCoy. And I think also some of the best, it makes me wonder how much of that, because I think the screenplay, Leonard Nimoy was definitely involved. Nick Mayer
and Nicholas Meyer as well.
And Nick Mayer was, and so but I can't help but imagine that at this point all of the cast have a sort of a voice to play, whether they're just interpreting the words that are written a certain way, or they might have even just been like, no, actually Sulu would say this, or no, actually Chekhov might say this. I can only imagine that kind of level of mastery over a character is what they appear to have achieved in this film. I mean, the interplays between all of them are wonderful. I also like that the story has a mission for when they arrive in San Francisco. Obviously, there's a lot of comedy involved in like the way they're dressed, and Spock with his bandana covering his ears, and they definitely it had simultaneously Star Trek's making fun of itself and the situation is funny, which is kind of a cool thing. I always like it when a story can do that. But then they all, Kirk sells his glasses, another great moment / gag, where he's, Spock's like, but didn't Dr. McCoy give you those as a gift? And he goes, and they will be again. That's the beauty of it, which is like so amazing. It's like, what is that called? The bootstrap predestination paradox or whatever. But anyways, they get $100 and then they split off on these different tasks. So Kirk and Spock have to go and find the big cash prize, the whales, right? You have Uhura and Chekhov are in charge of recharging the dilithium crystals, which I didn't mention in the summary, but that's another dilemma, is that the time warp exhausted the degraded the dilithium crystals, so they have to figure out a way to recharge them. And so that's Chekhov and Uhura's mission. Sulu has to work with Scotty and McCoy to outfit the Klingon bird of prey so that it can actually house the whales. That's one issue. So they're working on that problem, and so everyone's on these missions, and just watching all these characters kind of navigate through their individual missions is just wonderful. Also, I mean, like the whole scene with Scotty acquiring the glass, and he basically the way he buys this glass is also funny because he sells the formula for transparent aluminum to the guy who might have invented transparent aluminum. So it's just, there's a lot of these like timey-wimey gags which are pretty funny. And of course the most famous computer. Hello, computer.
Try the keyboard. Oh, how quaint. And then he's just like mad typing there. That obviously makes it's meaningless typing, but yet you get all these, this formula and all that. To your point about the actors knowing their characters so well, that's I mean, at this point they've been living with these characters for so long and have had the opportunity to reprise the characters at least more than a couple times. And reading the novelization and the comic book, you see certain lines that are probably verbatim from the script, yet in the movie they're different. And it's probably and they're better most of the time. The part where you were just talking about, where Scotty and McCoy are talking to the guy, in the, I guess in the original script, that was meant to bring up the question of, well, if we gave this guy the formula for transparent aluminum and he is the guy, then doesn't that imply that we are going to get home? Because obviously transparent aluminum exists because we gave it to this guy. But I mean, that's too much. It's in the movie, it's just Scotty and McCoy, and Scotty's just like, how do we know he didn't invent the thing? Right. And McCoy just gives a look. He doesn't even have dialogue. He just has a look. And it's like, oh yeah, okay. And then that's it. And it's gold. It's gold, that scene.
There's a funny sort of thing that we're gonna have a Doctor. This is not a pure Star Trek discussion. We're gonna have a Doctor Who moment here. That same problem was a big deal during the 10th Doctor's time, where he was like so obsessed with paradoxes and not making sure he didn't have a paradox, happening, and even the TARDIS turns into a paradox. By the time we get to the 11th Doctor, every time there's a situation where there's a paradox, he says most paradoxes are resolved generally, and he just moves on. He's like, right. Let's move on. It's yes, it is a paradox, but it'll get resolved. Like I promise.
It'll work itself out.
It'll work itself out. And I feel like that's kind of like the vein of that discussion. You know, it's like, well, I mean,
Yeah.
what harm could it do? I mean, the ultimate
Right.
there what I love is that there, if you think about it, the ultimate, like, if they fail, the earth is gone. Their earth is gone. So they may as well do everything they can to try to influence the earth of the past, or like help their mission to save their earth in the future. So at that point it becomes irrelevant. It's kind of a cool idea too, a concept. If you ever become a time refugee, just remember, save your future.
Well, speaking of time travel and all that stuff, bears mentioning that Nicholas Meyer had something to do with the story, the original story itself, and of course, he famously directed Time After Time,
Right.
which is another time travel story set in San Francisco.
Right, that's right.
So San Francisco seems to be a nexus for time travel or time travelers, because of course the Eighth Doctor movie
is also in San Francisco.
is also set in San Francisco. So San Francisco seems to be a nexus for temporal shenanigans.
There's a have you been to San Francisco?
No, but you, of course.
I am very familiar with San Francisco. My family, when we first moved to the United States, we landed in San Francisco because my mother's entire family was already living there, my grandparents. So we spent a year there. But then every summer, I didn't know what a true Miami summer was for a long time, because my parents, I guess to get a break from my sister and I, would ship us to San Francisco to be with our family, because we probably drove them crazy and they just needed a summer to recuperate. But anyways, very familiar with San Francisco, and it does have a magical quality to it. San Francisco's got a wild energy, if you will, and you could see in the film there is that, like, it has and certainly a lot has happened in San Francisco, because there's also the Next Generation episode Arrow Time that also is in San Francisco.
Right.
Times Arrow, sorry, yeah, that's also in San Francisco. So there's something special about it. And well, on a very basic level, Starfleet headquarters is in San Francisco.
Right.
So that's kind of cool.
Now, when you watch Star Trek 4, do you get any special? I mean, having been to San Francisco so often, I mean, have you ever visited, I don't know, looked for locations where, like, oh, this is the corner where Kirk said "double damn ass on you" to
absolutely. So
okay.
after the film, I remember when we would go. So later on, like around, at this time they were still living in the city. When we would visit after Star Trek 4, my family, a lot of times they took my sister and I to, like, do the touristy things, like go to Fisherman's Wharf, and, like, just all these, Coit Tower and all these cool things that you could do in San Francisco. And I remember there was so much material that you could get. Like, San Francisco really loved Star Trek 4. You could get, like, autographed everything of Star Trek. There was, like, so much Star Trek stuff in San Francisco, and so they would let you know this is where, like, you could easily find all the locations. So it wasn't hard to find the locations where they shot the scenes. And I think you could still find those locations today. Many of them they don't look like they do anymore, but they're still there because the city has a lot of history. So yeah, that was a fun thing about going to San Francisco. And I always felt this weird feeling, like, I don't think all of my cousins watched Star Trek. A few of them might have, but they certainly knew about my love for Star Trek, and so they would always, like, encourage it or point things out to me. But I always did feel like I was going to Starfleet headquarters. And I facetiously say that Seattle is now Starfleet headquarters just because I happen to live here. But truly, San Francisco is the definitive Starfleet headquarters, and I believe it always will be.
I agree.
But that's an interesting point that I didn't connect until our discussion today, is that how much of a nexus San Francisco is for time travel. So there's something there.
Yeah.
Very timey-wimey.
Enough cannot be said about Leonard Nimoy's direction in the movie. Star Trek 3 is, is a great film, very entertaining, very much for the fans. But Star Trek 4 just kind of opened the doors to non-fans, and I think a lot of it had to do with Leonard Nimoy's excellent direction
And the story.
and
I mean, I
and
think
the story, which he, of course, was involved in. He was the one that came up with the idea of the whales and all that.
the real heavy Star Trek stuff is the bookends of this film, if you will. It's kind of like
mhm.
you have the resolution to that trilogy, if you will, of what happens to Captain Kirk and crew after after Star Trek 3, where they basically they stole the Enterprise. You have to remember, like, they just completely decided at this point we're renegades,
Mhm.
and that's what happened. So I like that also at the end, the president even says to Captain Kirk, "You of all people should know the importance of discipline within any chain of command," and he's like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
I should.
Yeah, but Nimoy had a tremendous task when you think about it, because it was. Could we have imagined a Star Trek film without the Enterprise? A Star Trek film mostly not set in space?
No, I
I
know.
mean, it's a tremendous task, and he delivered a great film. And I think two things that he did that were great is that he found that balance where, like you said earlier, something for everybody to do, and it's not easy because you do have that. It is a big cast, really, and even with the current films, it's not easy to find that balance to have something for everybody in that cast to do, that you feel is relevant or you feel is vital. And Star Trek 4 is one of the rare films that finds something truly for everybody. And the other thing is that I think Nimoy was the director that really understood the physicality of Kirk. Let me bring Kirk here. Star Trek 3 and 4 are really the last two films where Kirk is battling the enemy, in a sort of speak. I mean, you have Kirk battling the Klingon at the end of Star Trek 3. It's an actual throwback to the series where, the end of every episode would be Kirk, fighting somebody in the engine room or on the planet, and he'd rip his shirt and all that stuff. And it's a callback to that. But, Shatner, that he is good at that. And Kirk is the image you have of Kirk, of, mano a mano, just taking on the bad guy. Of course, Star Trek 4, there is really no bad guy, but yet you have the ending where he's rescuing the whales.
Right.
And there's a lot of physicality in there, because he's navigating the sinking ship. He frees Jillian and Scotty, and then he dives into the water, and you have those scenes where he's swimming, and he's working the controls, and the things open. So Nimoy never forgot that you have to have Kirk doing the physical at the end. Star Trek 1 didn't have that. As wonderful as Star Trek 2 is, and 6, the two Nicholas Meyer ones don't have Kirk really doing much. He's mostly on the bridge, and it's mostly the fire. That's what you see.
Well, with the exception of the what I call the amazing leap that he does at the dais, which we'll talk about.
There is the amazing Olympic high jump.
The Olympic high jump, or whatever it is that he somehow, a bit
cheesy.
Yeah, it's a little much, but
a little much. See, Nimoy.
I do, I do like that.
I said, Nimoy. Kudos to Nimoy for understanding the physical prowess of Kirk.
And I have to give Shatner and the writers of Star Trek 5 a little credit, because
of 5
of Star Trek 5, because you're right. This is like his you do see a more tired Captain Kirk in Star Trek V, even though he's
Yeah.
climbing Mount El Capitan without ropes in the film. Which, by
Yes.
the way, did you know that was recently a human actually recently
Yes.
did that
Without, yes.
without ropes?
Yes.
Yeah, Alex Hanold, I think is his name.
Extraordinary.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's amazing that that even happened. And I it's extremely dangerous. Like could never, I couldn't even do that climb, first of all. but to imagine not having ropes or a companion
Yeah.
with
Yeah, he
rocket
was
boots.
barefoot. I mean, I was just like, what?
Kirk
Yeah.
had Spock.
Bare hands, bare feet. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think he was. I don't think he was barefoot. He had his climber shoes on.
Oh, he did?
There's
Okay.
you're thinking of the photo when he finally
I'm thinking of the photo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think you see his shoes in his
Okay.
hands
Well,
or something
good.
like that.
All
Yeah.
right.
But bare hands, certainly, with just that powder that the climbers use,
Yeah.
it's nerve-wracking to even think about it. But Captain Kirk's not a fighter anymore, so I love that he's kind of just climbing Mount El Capitan. There's like a lot of, we'll talk about that more in Star Trek 5, but then in Star Trek 6 he is like a captain's chair captain. Like he does most of, but there's still, Rura Penthe. I mean, he gets his moments.
Yeah, but 4 is really, I think, to me, like, he still looked fit.
I think that's the difference, is that this is like we see a considerable aging between Star Trek 4 and Star Trek 5, and then even more in Star Trek 6. So like William Shatner definitely, hey, they get old.
No, I know. No, but also just in terms of it's the climatic, it's the positioning of where the action is. Like it's
if it weren't for that, the mission would have been doomed. It relied on, at the end of the day, it relied on Captain Kirk getting physical, and you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, which I mean, Nimoy really understood all these characters so well. And
do you think is this a fair question to ask, or should we wait till after our Star Trek 5 discussion? Do you think William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, we obviously know Leonard Nimoy did a great job at directing. Do you think William Shatner also did a great job at directing Star Trek 5?
Oh, we got to table that one too.
Okay, we'll table that. We'll table it.
To further my admiration for Nimoy, do you remember how Leonard Nimoy was one of those directors when the VHS copies came out? He was one of the first directors to really advocate for widescreen.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do, and I remember Star Trek the Motion Picture. Star Trek 4 having at some point a widescreen release, if I'm not mistaken.
And there was a video where it was Leonard Nimoy was explaining, because this is something that our younger viewers will not remember or know anything about. But of course, now our TVs are formatted for that style. But when you and I were growing up, we would have pan and scan, where they would basically cut the screen, and if it was a 2-shot, what they would do is they would reformat it so you would just see one person first, and then you would cut to the other, but you would lose the framing, the correct framing. And I remember Leonard Nimoy was one of the directors who, there was a little video, and he would explain the importance of why the VHS was formatted that way, and it was called the Director's Series. It was a subset that Paramount was putting out. So the VHS had its own, I think it was gold or it was some gold or brownish color, and it was meant to distinguish it from other VHS releases, which was pan and scan. And I always thought that was, oh, there we go.
Just to kind of for the viewers that are watching on YouTube, to kind of illustrate the difference, you can see here, this is even, I think, to illustrate Star Trek is in a, usually I think they're shot in a 70 millimeter format, which is a longer, wider rather, I should say, film format than 35 millimeter is. And so you can see here how the sides, actually you lose the sides, and that's why a lot of films, you'll notice that they used to intentionally sometimes put the action in the middle, or the whatever was going on in the middle, so that when it got cut down for video release or TV release, it actually still made sense, since and then you would have, of course, the panning when you needed to. Like, I remember that being very prominent on movies like Ben-Hur and Cleopatra. When they would air on television, you could tell that there was like some weird thing going on where the frame was being moved around or something like that,
Right.
with the pan and scan. So
Right. Absolutely. And I would wager that was my first real education about widescreen, was from
Star
as a
Trek
matter of
4.
fact, I'm going to bring out this is from the VHS.
Ooh.
This is it came with a little lobby card. As you can see in the bottom, it says widescreen, and then in the back it has a little just information about Star Trek 4. But it was so that you understand that you lose. If it were pan and scan, you probably would only get Kirk and Spock, but you don't get the rest of the image.
Right.
And I remember there was a lot of people who didn't like widescreen. They're like, oh, but they're cutting people's heads off or something. I don't know.
My parents, not my father, he understood it, but my mother always thought that we were watching the movie in a strange way, where we were cutting
Mine too.
She thought we were cutting the top and the bottom of the film off.
Yes.
So it was actually
exactly. I think everybody's mom thought that.
Well, I'm glad that the widescreen, the wide format, is the winner, because it is a beautiful format, in my opinion, for storytelling, because it does, I think, mimic more what what you see when you look out into the world with your own eyes. In a sense, we do have a rather wide perspective.
Right.
We're not in the square.
Well,
Whoa, that was a little Instagram meta thing going on there. What did you think of Dr. McCoy and the hospital scenes? Did you finally notice the thing over that I was talking about, over the that scene when they dress up to go to the hospital to rescue Chekhov? They're in the beginning when he cures that. There's a couple of things Dr. McCoy does that are kind of cool. One is he gives this poor woman who's getting kidney dialysis, he gives her like a couple of pills, and it's going to basically regenerate her kidneys, and within the span of
moments.
a few moments. It's like pretty awesome. But Dr. McCoy's so upset. He's like constantly like, it's like the goddamn Spanish Inquisition, or like, what are we dealing with, medievalism here, and he's just like he's so passionate. Do you think there was like in the writing, is there like a critique on medicine at the time? Like, do you think Star Trek was saying something about current medical practices? Like, because I wondered that watching it this time around. I was like,
really?
Man, like, well, Dr. McCoy, like, he's just like brutal. Like, he's just like, like, if you think about the time, 1986, right? Whatever they were going to do in that hospital was probably the latest, like, or very close to the latest, like, medical procedure, that's like,
yeah.
So is it really our fault in 1986, that we were going to do fundoscopic examination on Chekhov?
Which yeah.
Like,
I'll never forget the word fundoscopic.
I know one of the gems of Star Trek 4 is that now I know the term fundoscopic examination. Drilling holes in his head's not the answer. The artery must be repaired. Step aside with your butcher knives and let me do my job.
Let me save this man.
Man, I mean, I love it. It's such a great, but he's like butcher knives and like, medieval and like, so I just like, it kind of gives me the sense of like, we do see, I think we are further along, now that we're in the, the teens, the 20 teens here, the late 20 teens, by the way. Medicine has come a long way, even from 1986, but it just makes me kind of laugh a little to think that, yeah, it's true. By our standards, even today, like some of the things that were considered, at the front edge of medical technology now we would think of as, oh gosh, we used to do that. So for Dr. McCoy, I guess that answers my question. For him, it would be awful to witness medicine of
It
our
is the
time.
Dark Ages.
It is the
Yeah,
Dark Ages.
sure.
You're right. For him, it's
Oh,
true.
yeah.
In the context, you're right. But I guess I just wondered if there was a critique there, or if it was just purely humor. I guess it was purely humor.
I think it was purely humor. I think there's a lot in this movie that just works great with the humor. I mean, some of my favorite parts. That's obviously one of my favorite parts. I love the conversation McCoy has with Spock when they're on board the ship, and he's basically saying, "Well, what was it like?" And Spock is like, "Well, without a common frame of reference, there's really no way to discuss it." McCoy is like so insulted, after
He's
having
like, you
his
mean I have to die to have a conversation with you about death?
McCoy's just completely just pissed off over that.
I love it.
Yeah, and
then just I think that you kind of see that, like, as cantankerous as he is towards Spock, there's really a deep, kind of a friendship there, and he just really wants to, like, finally he's just like, Spock, just like, come on, let's talk about this, and
yeah.
Spock refuses. I also like that Spock refuses to call Captain Kirk Jim in the beginning, and he's like, it'd be inappropriate to call you anything but Admiral, or and stuff like that.
Well, on that, the novel, actually, novelization goes a little into Spock's feelings. Well, yeah, I mean, he has feelings.
Yes. As his mother points out.
Right, that's his dilemma, is that he has them, he doesn't want them. And there's a moment where Kirk, they're on board the ship, and Spock says something like, we'll fail on our mission, and Kirk is upset, and he's like, we're talking about the future of the Earth. Don't you have any goddamn feeling about that? And he just kind of storms off, and McCoy and Scotty are kind of in the background, and you just kind of see Spock, and he's a bit. I mean, you don't really understand. You don't really know. I mean, he's kind of taken aback by that, but in the novel, and Leonard Nimoy reads this passage, and he does a great job. He's actually quite hurt by that, and he doesn't understand why. And he's sort of coming to understand, wait a minute, that hurt me. I feel like suddenly he's experiencing something. He's trying to understand, why is he experiencing that? And he's coming to understand his friendship. Because obviously if they weren't friends, it wouldn't have hurt him as much. But it does, because they are friends. And the performance of Leonard Nimoy as Spock in this movie, I think, showcases, I guess we could call it maybe the second phase of the three phases of Spock. Certainly from the show up until Star Trek II, we see one phase of Spock. We see Spock struggle with his human side, and then by the time we get to Star Trek II, we see we see a Spock that is almost, he's seen it all. It's almost the Uber Spock. Surprises him.
Well, I would even argue that there's a kind of a lot of elements of that in the motion picture. I mean, like, he has that whole mind meld with V'ger post scene with Kirk, where he's like holds Captain Kirk's hand. He says V'ger can't even understand this simple emotion, or this simple, expression between us. I mean, like the friendship, or whatever. And to me, that's like a Spock that's evolved even from the original series. Like, I feel like
we see that progression.
And then, yeah, you're right. In Star Trek 2, he's just like, he's figured himself out. He's very comfortable in his skin.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you have that line where Kirk is taking command, and Spock is like, I have no ego. I mean, Spock he knows his place in the universe. He knows his place with his friends. Saavik is looking to him to explain human behavior. But of course, with 3, we hit the reset button, and in 4, we're seeing how he's having to relearn everything. And even in 6, when the Klingons beam away, and the rest of the crew is like, oh, thank God it's over. And they're making all these comments, and Spock is sort of like, he looks almost puzzled by the reactions. And of course, you know, in a way, that confrontation that Kirk has with Spock is like, you vouched for me. I mean, it's Spock he still doesn't get it. So it's not until really almost, I mean, I don't know if you want to argue, I mean, that'll be a conversation for later. We can either say unification, or we can say the rebooted Star Trek, where we finally see a Spock who gets back to sort of a situation where he's comfortable with himself, but he is more emotional, I would argue. He knows that emotions are not something to be held back, but he's more in control of his emotions and knows when to use them.
I think that's really great to look at it on that span of time. I think that on the subject of, since it's, we're having this discussion on Father's Day, we haven't really talked about the relationship between Sarek and Spock. I think in this movie, it also has like a resolution and then a turning point from here, which we haven't gotten to Sarek in our Next Generation discussions yet, but there's even more information that we find out through that episode. But here I really was delighted that, well, in Star Trek 3, you get Sarek reintroduced as a character. He's not in Star Trek 2, yeah. You get reintroduced to Sarek as a character in Star Trek 3. We know him from the original series, of course, and it's he who prompts Kirk to go retrieve Spock. And I think that's like fascinating because there's this like, Sarek is purely Vulcan, yet he's doing this like illogical thing in a way. Why isn't he accepting that Spock is dead himself, And I think that like that's kind of like something that plays in the background, but then there's this nice scene, of course he even comes to defend Kirk. He comes to Earth in Star Trek in this movie. He's there to defend and represent the crew of the Enterprise in this hearing that's happening with the Klingon in that scene. And you could see that Sarek himself is evolving as a character, and he finally says to Spock at the end, he's like, your associates are really good people. Like all this time he's been disapproving of Spock's decision to go into Starfleet, live among and work among humans, and not pursue an academic life in in the Vulcan Science Academy. But here, you have this wonderful kind of thing where Sarek kind of finally, in his own way, admits to Spock, hey, I approve of you. So I
was
thought that,
wrong.
yeah, I was wrong, basically.
Yeah.
And I thought that was wonderful. And it's a shame that it's interesting how it plays out in the J.J. Abrams universe, because Sarek's a strong character in that as well. It's interesting how they brought him into play for Spock's character, and there's a very similar vibe going on, but of course it's executed a lot differently. And now Star Trek Discovery, we're gonna see Sarek a lot more. So it's cool, I think, to see the pure Sarek, if you will, the Mark Leonard Sarek, and I think that Star Trek really gave us a lot of great moments between Spock and his father, and that was like a story that I loved watching resolve here. And then I think that's it. We don't see. Oh, yeah, we do see actually 6. A lot of. In Star Trek 6, we see Sarek, but funny enough, we also see Admiral Cartwright, who's in this film. Remember, and the Klingon ambassador.
And 6 again.
We see them again, so it's cool. Yeah. I really like that we do see these characters come back for the final chapter as well. Well,
with Sarek, and I'll save some of this for our conversation about that episode, but the episode named Sarek. But I feel Sarek only appeared once on the original show. He also appeared in the.
Mark Leonard appeared as the Romulan, but yes,
right. But as Sarek, he only appeared once, and this character of Sarek only appeared once in the original show, and then again in the animated series. And but really, most people only knew him from the one episode, which is a classic one of the all-time
Spock has
best
to-
episodes, of course.
Right.
But still, I think it's Star Trek, and I think with fans like you and I think it's Star Trek 3 and 4 where Sarek really resonated with us because, like you just said, Mark Leonard came back and he added so much more nuance to the role. And, his actions in part 3 really say a lot about who he is, because obviously, we get the sense that what was done in part 3, I mean, the Klingon priestess says so, it hasn't been done in a really long time.
Right.
And she asks, why do you ask this to be done? And he has that almost
that famous
impossible
response,
line
yeah.
for a Vulcan to say, when it comes to matters regarding my son, logic escapes me, or something. I mean, for him to acknowledge that, he the pion of logic, to say that logic,
Sarek, it's true.
It's remarkable.
He says, I think he said something a little bit more Vulcan, which is like, my logic is uncertain at this, with matters concerning my son or something, but it is true. You're right. It's
Sarek to say that.
Yeah, it's tantamount to what you just said. You're right.
Yeah. And it's extraordinary to think, Sarek is almost the original rebel. We think of Spock as being so rebellious, but it's Sarek. I mean, he married he married a human.
Well, he's also apparently with a Vulcan princess before.
Princess.
There's a lot of dubious.
There's a lot of but Sarek is I think
there's a story there actually, because it sounds like you're right. Like, he was married to this Vulcan princess, and he somehow fell in love with Amanda Grayson, and so on and so forth. And it's kind of
Amanda Grayson, who it's the last time we see Spock's mother.
Well, we see
on screen.
I think it's the last time we see Spock's mother. Yes, you're right, on screen, and it's Jane Wyatt. It's the original actress who portrayed Amanda on the original series. So I love that she was still able to do that, and and she has, and her small part is, it's a small part. It's delightful.
Perfect.
It's so delightful. It's like, you really don't need much because
explaining to Spock, the computers know that you're half human.
Yeah.
By the way, did you catch in this rewatching that one of the things that Spock is tested on is the Klingon mummification glyph?
Yeah. Is that the reference? Is this possibly the weird throwaway reference that Star Trek Discovery is based on? Huh. So we're calling it right now the Klingon mummification glyph. Correct.
I think others
How do you feel?
Now.
How do you feel? I don't know. He did say, I think Brian Fuller said something about it's an original series reference, and certainly Star Trek 4 is the original series, so we might have been thinking of the show when we look at it, but maybe the reference as to why the Klingons look so different, and why I think the ship is called a sarcophagus ship, right? Or something like that. That's what one of the leaks said. So it's interesting that there is reference to a mummification glyph, and that Klingons mummified their dead.
And maybe that's why they look so different. Is because they're
zombie Klingons.
They're older Klingons.
They're mummy Klingons.
They're mummy Klingons. I don't know if that makes things better or worse. But on that note, I think
a few wrap up. Were we wrapping up? Are we gonna give it I mean, there's no rating necessary. It's infinity. Star Trek 4.
Star Trek 4. It's a 10.
It's a 10. It's like, okay, we'll save the infinity for another Star Trek movie.
I mean, it's come on. There's no way to rate this movie. This is a part of our childhood. This is like I said, I think it represents the last time that we saw Kirk and company as the vanguard of the Star Trek universe, driving Star Trek forward. and I remember just coming out of that movie so excited for what the Enterprise A was going to be doing and what adventures lay ahead. And like you said,
which will lead us beautifully to our next Star Trek film discussion, one of our oddly favorite films. Like Star Trek 5, The Final Frontier.
The Final Frontier.
But anyways, sorry, finish your point, Doctor. I apologize.
No point. I love this movie. I love the humor. I love the acting. Oh, you know what? We didn't talk about at all. We didn't talk about Jillian.
You're absolutely right. We did not talk about Jillian, and I have it
Holy
in
cow.
my notes to talk about Jillian. Well, we already knew that this was going to be a 10, so let's have a little quick discussion about Jillian. What happens to her after? That's what I kind of want to know.
No.
Does she? I was disappointed. That's right. You're right.
Debt of Honor, which
I forgot about Debt of Honor. Hey, I was disappointed that in Star Trek Generations, in the Nexus, there's another woman named Antonia.
That we have to table for Generations. That's a whole hour.
Okay. In my mind, Captain Kirk, when he finally does retire, ends up with Jillian. Why is that outrageous? Is that like too much to ask for?
What about Carol Marcus?
Well, Carol Marcus dies. No. Well, BB Besh died. Didn't she? No, she didn't. What happened?
Yes, she did, but recently.
Hmm.
No, I think
he ends up with Carol
Marcus. Although there's an argument to be made there because David's because of David's death, perhaps they never get back together. Although there is the prologue that was never filmed for Star Trek 6 that was going to have Carol and Kirk together.
Really? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, but
I guess that is better. It's true. Carol Marcus is. I feel like Carol Marcus is more.
Yeah, there's more, but Jillian, I think. I don't know.
I love the idea that she's in the future now. Like it's kind of like she is a time refugee in a sense, and like now she has a whole new life. Her whole life was devoted around the protection of these two whales, and in a way she is the only qualified person to. I mean, like you have to understand, like I think even though she has a really valid point, it's like, yeah, you're going to take these two whales to the future, but no one in your future knows how to care for them or anything, and so it's like possible that they take her back. But then what's her life beyond that? Does she live on in the comics? And obviously you reminded me that she does.
Invaded.
Oh, is it?
We gotta wrap it up.
Okay. So yeah, Jillian, at first I thought she should end up with Captain Kirk. I like that idea, but you're right, Carol Marcus. What do you think, audience?
I gotta run.
Doctor,
live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. Peace in our time. And thank you for talking about Star Trek 4 with me. I know there's a lot more we can talk about, but yes. I think we covered everything. Everything that's important. Thanks for joining me.